you're doing work in the publishing industry, anything from signing a book contract or working with a publisher or an author, you may have seen a term called NDA. That is a non-disclosure agreement, and that prevents you from saying certain things if you sign this contract. So what exactly is an NDA? How do we navigate it? And more importantly, how do we negotiate it? Let's talk to everybody's favorite entertainment and IP lawyer, Tony.
Hi, my name is Tony Lee Costas. I'm an adjunct professor of entertainment law and IP at New York Law School, and I have an Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube account called The IP Professor that is dedicated to all things intellectual property.
Tony, I want to talk a little bit about NDAs, non-disclosure agreements in book contracts. We know in the publishing industry, if you are going to be signing a book contract, oftentimes an NDA will be a part of that contract. And we have discussions in the publishing industry on why this is both a good thing and could potentially be a little bit of a red flag. So can you break down what a non-disclosure agreement is for us?
Yeah, so a non-disclosure agreement is going to vary depending on which industry that agreement is used, but essentially it's an agreement between two parties where one party is agreeing to not disclose any information regarding any aspect of the relationship between the two parties. So I'll use a personalized example. About a year and a half ago, I had the privilege of being a part of the screening of She-Hulk, which is now available on Disney+. But before it became available to the public, She-Hulk was in pretty much post-production. They were doing some retakes, but I had the first chance to watch it in October of 2021. At the time that I was asked, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement with Marvel Studios, where the essence of it was that I could not disclose any contents of any episode that I had seen throughout the 3 weeks that I was screening that show. So I couldn't disclose that Megan Thee Stallion was in the show. I couldn't disclose that Charlie Cox would be reprising his role as Daredevil Matt Murdock. I couldn't disclose that Hulk has a son named Scar who makes a return in the finale. The only reason why I'm talking about this is because now the NDA is not governing me anymore because the show has already aired and all these spoilers are not spoilers anymore. They're out there in the public. Sorry if you haven't watched She-Hulk, but either way, that was the essence of that NDA. And NDAs come in different flavors. You may see this even with employees of, let's say, a company like Coca-Cola, who have to sign an NDA that they can't disclose the Coca-Cola recipe if they have access to that because it's a trade secret. And actually that leads to an important thing, which is that NDAs in the intellectual property space are more commonly found in scenarios where there's a trade secret at play. And trade secrets could be formulas, recipes, information, client lists, anything of that sort that is not readily ascertainable. Efforts are done to maintain its secrecy. Competitors want it, and there's a financial component to it. So I know in the book space, if we're going to personalize a little bit more, authors may sign an NDA where they can't disclose to the public how the publisher works, or like the processes that they collect information, or how they even manufacture books, things like that. It could be anything, but those NDAs are operating almost as a measure on the part of the publisher to maintain a trade secret, because they don't want, let's say you signed that NDA with Penguin. Penguin doesn't want Scholastic to know about it, or they don't want Random House to know about it, or they don't want some college press to know about it, because that's how they've made their money. That's how they want that competitive edge over everybody else. So NDAs, again, the flavor of them is going to vary depending on what industry you're talking about, but the essence of them is fairly the same across the board.
And it is pretty typical, pretty common to see NDAs involved with our book contracts because, of course, companies do want to protect their intellectual property and what goes on inside of their company so that their competitors do not know. And of course, there are both green flags and red flags when it comes to this. Oftentimes we talk in the publishing industry about some of these being a little on the predatory side if you're not allowed to speak about your experience at all. It's one thing to have a conversation about protecting how the company works and that intellectual aspect within it, but making sure that you are not allowed to talk about anything ever could potentially be a red flag and indicate it might be a publishing house you do not want to work with if they're potentially doing some shady things on the inside and all of a sudden you do not have the ability to then advocate for yourself publicly in those conversations. So when it comes to these NDAs, what should we be looking for to make sure we're comfortable with it so that the company is protected and we're protected and we don't have to run the risk of those potential red flags?
So I think the essence of an NDA is, again, to protect whoever. Well, I think it is in some way to protect both parties. I think it varies, again, depending on the context. But if laying out the situation you're talking about, KM, if you have such a prohibitive type of NDA, obviously that's a red flag. So one, the question becomes, can you redline it? And the answer is yes, of course you can redline those types of agreements. So working with an attorney that specializes in the review of NDAs is going to be paramount to that process. But I think at the end of the day, what you want in this type of agreement is something where you feel like you're going to be like not so shackled, if you will.
Mhm.
You want, the essence of contract law is that you want a meeting of the minds. And so how can you have meeting of the minds if an NDA is going to be more favorable for the publisher and less favorable for the author? So I think there needs to be some give or take. It needs to be a two-way street here. And especially, let's put this in perspective. There's one thing to sign a publisher agreement with a publisher where an author is going to get, let's say, an advance of 10,000, 20,000, or whatever. And then if they produce a draft, they get another money, and then another sum of money. And then if they produce another draft, they get another sum. And then, of course, comes the publication, royalty, this and that. So an author will be paid throughout that process. But then with an NDA, it more likely than not, there's not going to be a sum attached to it. There's not going to be any money attached to it. So you're going to be asked to just say nothing. You're going to be almost like put in a chokehold, and you're not even getting paid for it. To me, it just feels like that's so prohibitive. So I think that underlines again how an attorney stepping in to help review and redline that NDA is a very essential part of this process. And I think working with your attorney and communicating and voicing what you want out of that NDA and what your needs are, I think is going to be paramount to that process. There's not a cookie cutter model, but I think, if I speak more broadly here, authors' rights matter. So, you're an author, you work hard on your drafts, you work hard on your manuscripts. You want a fair cut. And I think it's only right that you're not being hoodwinked by the publisher in a situation like that.
And as always, if you are going to be signing a contract of any kind, you should be having a lawyer, a professional lawyer who understands the publishing and entertainment industries going over that contract, because you and I, as lay people, do not have the ability to really go through and understand all of the legalese within those contracts. So making sure you have a professional on your side who is the only person in your publishing career truly lobbying for you that doesn't have skin in the game, you are going to be able to stay protected by working with these lawyers. Now, when it comes to these NDAs, Tony, we talked a little bit about protecting the company and the inner workings of the company, but authors could also potentially see a little bit of a different type of NDA where they are not allowed to talk about the content that they are creating. We talked a little bit about this in the beginning with your viewing of She-Hulk, so go over that a little bit for me if an author should come across that in their contract where they are not allowed to talk about the content of their books until a certain point of time.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of, do you want the public to know that type of information out there? I know that in the case of Marvel Studios, they are really known to be extremely secretive about any project that they have, mainly because they're known to have pretty dope cameos. They
Yeah.
also have incredible developments that then segue into how the next films are going to happen, so on and so forth. So it's understandable for a company like them to want to enforce an NDA where I can't disclose any of the details that I shared earlier, because, you know, if I had shared at the time in October 2021 that Matt Murdock She-Hulk was going to be, or Matt Murdock Daredevil was going to be making his return in She-Hulk, that would have led to a massive ripple effect across the comic book space. That would have been the headline, because now it means that Marvel, who hadn't made a Daredevil series since the Netflix show, now he's in the fold. They could make a show out of it. They hadn't even announced that Daredevil Reborn was becoming a series on Disney Plus in the future. They never talked about Vincent D'Onofrio coming back as Kingpin. None of this information was out in the public in 2021. We only learned about it this past summer at San Diego Comic-Con, and that's because Marvel Studios buttoned up and made sure that nobody, and I mean nobody, had no way of sharing any of these details that they had seen from She-Hulk. they wanted to control the narrative. They wanted to control when the public would know this type of information would come out. And then, of course, the other problem with Marvel Studios and their NDAs is they've historically been known they've been a victim, unfortunately, of leaks, either by an employee that just slips it out in the public. That actually happened with the Spider-Man No Way Home trailer, where somebody released the unedited cut. It was basically like it was non-CGI edited version of the trailer. And because of that, Sony and Marvel had to release the trailer out of compulsion because they wanted to show people the real deal. So NDAs, for that reason, I think show that Marvel were just trying to protect their IP and they wanted to kind of control the narrative. In the same way, if a publisher works with somebody like J.K. Rowling, who had a Harry Potter series, they probably didn't want her to divulge all the details of like, oh my God, there's a villain named Voldemort that Harry Potter is going to be dealing with in the future. And go on and on about every single book. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that they want to, the publisher wants to add some type of suspense and create some appeal and drive for people to go to a bookstore and actually buy the book. So I could see that being one main reason why NDAs will include a provision where an author can't really share details about that. I think that may be flexible for negotiations, but I think that's a very valid reason for sure.
And I would say it's fairly common to see these inside of your bookish contracts. So if you are working in the publishing industry and you come across a non-disclosure agreement, just be sure to check in with your lawyer, make sure they go over all of the details, and they can easily explain to you what this means and the implications it has on you and your publishing career and how you're speaking about your book moving forward. So if you've got questions, go ahead and drop those down below. And as always, you can hang out with Tony online because he is dropping such valuable knowledge and answering your questions in real time. So Tony, where can everybody hang out with you?
You can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at the IP Professor, and you can reach out to me in the DMs if you have any specific questions.
And if you want more help navigating the world of contracts inside of the publishing industry, go ahead and hit that subscribe and notification bell. We're continuing to break down things you need to be watching for inside of this industry and bringing on guests just like Tony to make sure you are legally protected and ethically protected as you're jumping into these conversations and contracts in the book world. We want you to be putting your best foot forward and be safe and protected inside of this industry full of red and green flags. So if you have questions, go ahead and drop those down below. We will continue to drop daily videos to help you level up inside of this industry. And if you have guests you want to see on the show or topics we need to cover, let us know in the comments below. I'll see you in the next episode.